We're going to start with a look back and a look forward at Leinster House, because ahead of the Dáil break, Lou McDonald claimed the coalition's first year in office was the worst government performance since the Dáil was founded. The Sinn Fein president gave her a year-end assessment of the government, saying it was the worst this century. She characterised the coalition as a do-nothing government, saying it had processed the least amount of legislation this century. Lou McDonald said people were being hammered with price increases and mean-spirited decisions ahead of Christmas. So was 2025 the worst performance by any government since the foundation of the Dáil? And what is the plan for 2026? Joining me on this in studio is the Bodyke Gael TD, Joe Cooney, and on the line we have the Meelick Fianna TD, Cathal Crowe, and the Sinn Fein TD from Shannon, Donna, McGettigan. And Happy New Year to all three of you, and thanks very much for joining me on the show this morning. Joe, start with yourself. So as I mentioned there, Lou McDonald, Sinn Fein, branding this a do-nothing government in terms of the least legislation passed of any government this century. Only 21 bills passed by the end of last year. That was compared to 44 in 2024, the lowest number of laws enacted in a first year this century. How do you respond to that charge? Do the stats back up Sinn Féin's argument?
No, definitely not. But good morning, Alan, and a happy new year to you and all the listeners and all the people in the county. And look, it's just good to be back and up and going again. And again, look, at everybody's entitled to their opinion, but I can assure the people of Clare and the listeners here today that the government have worked very hard over the last 12 months. We are well aware and took up to about March, April to get issues back up and running because of issues that Sinn Féin and Speaking Time and the opposition were concerned about.
And some would say rightly concerned, and that there was a mistake from the government and Micheál Martin in particular to hammer out this deal with Michael Lowry and the regional members of the Regional Independent Group. That he should have foreseen the reaction from the opposition.
Yes, look at. He probably would have foreseen the reaction from the opposition, and I'm saying he wouldn't. But in fairness, the amount of speaking time the opposition has and the amount of government backbenchers speaking time they have is totally crazy. It don't balance out at all. So I didn't understand it when I went in. As you know, I was a new elected TD, and I was wondering was there need of all this going on. But when I see the way we are in government now, yes, it did need to go on. And there is loads of speaking time for the opposition with very little speaking time for the backbenchers.
And I don't want to get too bogged down in that because we've loads to talk about, but they would say, I'm sure Donna would say, it seems as if people supporting the government would be speaking out of both sides of their mouth if they have speaking time as part of the government and then speaking time where they can criticise elements of what the government is doing.
Well, one thing is, there's no one in the government speaking out both sides of their mouth. They're elected by the people to represent the people and deliver for the people of their constituency and of their country. And we in government are doing that. And I can say here this morning, I've been doing that for the past 12 months when I get the opportunities to do it. But the most important thing is we have different crises to deal with in government level. And it will be important we get on and deal with those crises for the people we're representing. And we need to do that going forward. And need to do more going forward, Ellen, that these people are properly looked after.
And indeed, on crises, which Joe just mentioned, Cathal, Sinn Féin saying this is also the worst first year of any government century. When you look at housing prices as well as legislation, why shouldn't people agree with them?
Just first of all, good morning and Happy New Year to Donna, to Joe and to all of your listeners as well, and to you, Alan. Just first of all, on the legislation, this is actually on par of the previous government that I was also part of. What happened in 2020 was we were straight into pandemic. 11 pieces of really nasty legislation that nobody liked passing had to be passed immediately to make the country safe. So when you peel that back, we're actually on par. And a lot of good's been done. Things are tumultuous in the world. Even the weekend, if you had us on last Friday, Alan, who could have foreseen what was going to happen over the weekend in Venezuela? The prices of gold and silver have shot up this morning. I heard on national news because people who have extreme wealth are now considering that's a safer place to have their money invested rather than traditional shares. So things are very rocky in the world scene. But what the ESRI, what global commentators are saying is that the Irish economy is buoyant. It's again set to grow this year. There are problems in the country. No one's saying there isn't. But what we saw in the last 6 weeks or so is a very ambitious and, most importantly, realistic housing plan that will achieve. And can I say it's important that we always hone this back to County Clare because that's what Donna, Joe and myself represent as a constituency. The housing targets for Clare the Clare County Council would have had in the last government, they were exceeded. So a lot of good has been done this county, but we have to be even more ambitious, because the one thing all of our political officers will deal with will be a huge amount of people in need of housing, and the profile of people needing housing has changed quite a lot as well. It's not all families. We have a lot of single people, broken relationships, people needing additional homes. So look, there's a huge amount to be done, but I'm confident that that's going to be done.
And just on both of those, I take the point you're making about the legislation in the COVID year, but the 21 bills passed last year was less than half of the previous year, and housing was meant to be the cornerstone of this government's legacy, yet starts are at their lowest since COVID.
Yeah, but just on that, legislation, so like a typical, I'm hoping to bring forward a piece of legislation in late January, possibly early February. A piece of legislation brought in on the floor of the Dáil can take around 2 years to bring forward and run through all its phases before our new President Cathal Connolly signs into law. So it's slow, it's arduous. Now, admittedly, some legislation, if it's emergency or urgent, it can be fast-tracked, but legislation slow. Why we saw a lot of legislation passed in spring, summer 2024 was the government, we all knew, I think whether you're in opposition, media or in government, we all knew it was running towards the end of its course. There was an urgency to get any loose end legislation tidied up and passed, and that was done. That is typical of all governments in all jurisdictions.
But even aside from that, wouldn't more legislation have been passed? Wouldn't more legislation have been passed last year if the government had hit the ground running? And as Joe alluded to, it took quite a number of months for that to happen.
No, look, we 4 TDs in Clare. Of the three of us on air, I was in the last Dáil, right? And in the last Dáil, I was doing well. People can look at my record. I was doing well if I got 3 or 4 speaking opportunities per week. I once compared that with Richard Boyd Barrett, who was getting 19 or 20 opportunities per week. So that did need to be straightened out. There was stuff at the beginning, it mightn't have been savoury, but it had to be straightened out. And I think people listening in Clare this morning would be far more concerned about how the economy's going, how their household incomes are going, rather than how many pieces of technical legislation were passed or not. Most people are probably orientated around costs of living and how their family are doing, as opposed to how many amendments have been brought in, how many have been accepted, and so on.
Yeah, and I accept that. And look, we will talk more about housing and cost of living later on. Just to bring you in now, Donna McGettigan, your party is calling this a do-nothing government, but critics would say your party is well able to talk a good game, but ducks the hard choices. So what would you have done differently in year one?
Well, in year one, if you want to talk about the end of rip-off, say, the cost of living, we could have given energy regulators more powers, pass legislation to make insurance companies pass on savings, bring in the big supermarkets to tackle rising costs of prices like other countries have done, and stop taxing or start taxing the banks. These are things that people are looking at. They're looking at their income, and as Cathal rightly said, people are looking at their own pockets and they're seeing what's being taken out of them. And when you look at the promised tax cuts for workers, that was then given to banks, landlords and developers, people are suffering, and I really don't think they understand how much pressure people are under. And when you talk about housing, you talk about the amount of children that were in homeless accommodation, emergency accommodation, running into years this year. And one story that really hit me was a child writing out his letter to Santa saying that he didn't want a bike because it was too big for his emergency accommodation. These are the kind of stories that are real, and these are the things that the government should be looking at. They should be looking at protecting people, giving people more money in their pocket, and helping people give a place to where they can afford to live.
And housing is a central tenet of Sinn Féin's criticism of the government. You say they've failed on housing, but at the last general election, voters rejected your housing model. So why should they trust you on that now?
Well, because when you look at the figures have gone up and up and up in homeless accommodation, and Clare County Council have been at capacity in emergency accommodation for years now, and they aren't being given enough. And the government will stand up and say county councils aren't doing enough, but they're not being given enough to do enough. So we need to bring out what our policy is, make it known what our policy is. I don't think people have really read into all our policies, and I trust Owen O'Brien in what he's bringing forward. And I think if we were to look at what we have, I think we can work this.
Joe, housing dominated the first year in office. Completions fell well short of the 40,000 homes promised. So we know what some of the issues there are, be it difficulties in sourcing sufficient numbers of construction workers, planning perhaps issue, construction costs, materials and so on, and infrastructure also a problem as well. How can they be addressed to ensure that the government builds on roughly 50,000 homes per year that it needs to do? Because at those issues, seeing on the face of it, seems like it's going to take quite some time to sort out.
Well, look, at housing is a crisis, is an issue. And it's something the government have been dealing with for the last number of months. And you did hit the nail on the head there, Alan. The lack of infrastructure is a major issue and a major concern. And we need to be looking at solutions. And in fairness, the government are looking at solutions. And there's a massive investment gone in, funding investment gone in to try and sort the lack of infrastructure. Even I came up with the idea myself of wastewater modular treatment systems in rural areas. We can see the rural areas that don't have the proper infrastructure. Unfortunately, they're not benefiting from housing. And unfortunately, people in those areas have to move out and leave rural communities under pressure going forward for the lack of workers, for the lack of children to schools, whatever the case may be. But again, infrastructure, investment, that's been done. And my belief is if we get a bit of time, we will put the infrastructure in place. We will have more housing developments going on and we will be able to more housing. And the other thing, Alan, is, which is very important, the increase in our population is not helping the situation. It's putting pressure on services. But in fairness, the government are dealing with that, and going forward, my belief is, yes, it'll take time, but it will be delivered.
But do you worry the time isn't on your government side? As you mentioned, there is going to be investment in infrastructure, but do you worry that the scale of what's needed in terms of sewerage infrastructure, water infrastructure, electricity, whatever it might be, that it is going to take so many years to sort out that it'll be beyond the run of this current Dáil term, and that it won't happen until after the next general election, by which point you may have been shunted out of office? I
wouldn't say it won't happen until after the next general election. It won't happen overnight, but I can tell you that the government committed to try and deliver housing for people that don't have housing in this country, and costs are crazy as well, and that's something we'll be looking at in 2026 to see what can be done as regards rising costs. It's not good enough on young people, and we are well aware that the young generation find it hard to get into the housing market at the moment. But again, with the benefits that's out there from government, with the government putting investment into infrastructure, my belief is, yes, more houses will be delivered in 2026 than have been over the past number of years. You did mention about workforce. I did mention that our population is increasing in a massive way, and my belief is, yes, there will be construction workers out there going forward to deliver these houses, but it's going to go down to make sure, like what you said, Alan, is the infrastructure is put in place timely. If not, we could have a bigger crisis going forward.
Cathal, the Taoiseach has defended the government's record. He's pointed to long-term infrastructure, as we've just been discussing there, rather than short-term fixes. Is there a danger, though, that people struggling now end up feeling forgotten?
Well, look, first of all, what we've seen all over this county is that the lack of infrastructure is an inhibitor to housing development. Broadford and Clare being two very big examples. That was topped up by government, the funding, just before Christmas, and I think we'll have some headway on that across 2026. You cannot build housing without sewage, road, water infrastructure, indeed the electricity grid. It was around this time last year we had Storm Aon and some place in the county without electricity for 2 years. So we need 2 weeks, I should say, good Lord. But what really is needed is a robust infrastructure that can carry housing development, and there's been a multi-billion euro plan announced in October for that. The hospital comes into that as well, having the infrastructure to sustain that population increase that Joe referred to. That is absolutely critical. If you look to the Celtic Tiger years, I think what happened in those years was housing development was outpacing infrastructure. I began my teaching career back then, and I think every school in the county had prefabs flung at the back of the schoolyard somewhere. An awful lot has caught up since. We now have state-of-the-art schools. We have more schools pipelined again for 2026, water and sewer schemes upgraded. but it's very costly, and sometimes that money isn't always seen by people. And it's what goes underground in terms of pipe networks isn't always seen or appreciated until it's fully needed. But it's probably the most costly infrastructure of any housing scheme you will have.
Cathal, can I just put the same question to you that I put to Joe though? Are you concerned at all that the planned investment in infrastructure is ultimately the right way to go, but that you won't get the credit for it, that it could take more years than this current coalition has to complete all that and for us to see the fruits borne out of it?
No, look, it's not about, we're not in this to get credit. I think when you move into national politics, it's about legislating, it's about managing the economy, because the country lives and dies basically on how it's been run by a government. And what we've seen in the last few years, both during a COVID pandemic, cost of living crisis, and we've seen European economies all take a dip. We've seen economic uncertainty in the wider field. So the Clare economy is very much intertwined with the global economy, and we have to be very cognizant of that. The last budget, it wasn't the best of budgets. I don't think anyone's saying it was, and I think a lot of people might have been quite disappointed with it. But that old term that not everyone likes, prudence, has to be there. And what I would say is that when I heard Pierce Doherty deliver his budget day speech, it exceeded by billions what the government were putting on the table. And that might sound great in sound bites, but that's the kind of stuff that puts the economy into choppy waters. So look, I know Lou McDonald has spent the early days of the new year putting out these press releases that things are very unstable and trying to paint Ireland in quite a bad way, I think, in the global scene. Well, I would say that we are responsive to what is happening. The economic outlook points to growth in 2026, but that growth is predicted not to be as high as 2025 or 2024. So okay. You have to manage things in that scenario. You can't just open checkbooks and start running the country.
And just on that, let me, just before we go to the break, let Donna respond to that. Donna, just a quick response to what Cathal has said, particularly in relation to Pierce Doherty and what Lou McDonald has been saying about the government.
Well, all our budgets have been fully costed, and by the government's own department. That's how it works. But I mean, if you were to look at spending on the budget, so if you look at the budget that was brought out, there was no help in the cost of living, but they found money to give to developers, which is €250,000 tax break, no income tax cuts for ordinary workers, but 105,000 tax breaks for rich executives. Some of them are earning over 3 million, and no additional help for renters, but increased tax breaks to landlords. So it depends on how you're using the resources. No, I must correct that, Alan.
Very, very quickly, Cathal, I do have to take a break.
There's improvements to core social welfare rates, and the tax cuts, just like this sounds like, here you go, developers, here's a blank cheque from the government. It's not. This is actually an economic measure that's supported by many economists to get building stimulated. Go back to the Celtic Tiger years, there were housing developments all over Clare. They're not happening. So you need to stimulate it.
Some of those tax breaks are being given to...
Okay, final quick response from you. Final quick response from you, Donna, and then I do have to take a break.
Some of those tax breaks are already being given to apartments that are already in development. They're not new coming on stream. So
okay, I do have to take a break now, and I know Joe. Joe, I know you want to come back. I'll let you. Joe, I will let you come back in on that. Joe, I will let you come back in on that because we will return to the cost of living after this break.
Morning Focus, the show you can trust to tell all sides of the story. Clare FM.
And you're welcome back to Morning Focus, where we're continuing the look back on the year that was and the year that will be at Leinster House with three of our TDs, Joe Cooney, Cathal, Crowe and Donna McGettigan. And Joe, I know you wanted to come in because we were touched on the cost of living there before the break, which of course does remain a major concern. Critics say the government found money for business and developers but not enough for ordinary workers. Was that a fair balance, fair criticism?
No, look, in fairness, we are well aware there's crises out there. We are well aware of the health crisis. We're well aware of the housing crisis. We have to move forward. We have to deal with those crises. And we see ways that we can get solutions to those crises. So if we are kept being stopped from every time we try to move forward by the opposition, we're not going to make progress. My belief is, yes, we are making progress. There's a massive investment into it. We're not investing into developers. We're investing to try and get houses for people that badly need houses out there. That's where the investment is going. My belief is we're going in the right direction, but the most important thing is the lack of infrastructure. We've mentioned it earlier on, Cathal mentioned there as well. If we don't get that push in place, we're going to have a bigger crisis going forward, Ellen, and that's one thing we don't want to see. You
mentioned solution to various crises, Joe. You know, in terms of cost of living, working people were promised help with it, yet fuel tolls and local property tax all went up. How do you solve that? Is that not a broken promise? What's the solution there?
I wouldn't say it's a broken promise. It's the first of 4 to 5 budgets. There's 4 further budgets to go ahead. The working class needs to be looked at and needs to be protected and needs to be supported. That will happen. But there's a crisis on our table at the moment, and those big crises, investments need to go in to try and solve those crises. That's what we're looking at. And yes, my belief is, yes, in the future, the working people who deserve to be looked after in this country will be looked after. But the most important thing is now we try and deal with the serious crisis, the increase in our population, and that's what we're working on at the moment, Ellen.
And I know yourself and Donna were having words on cost of living before the break, Cathal, and the pressures of cost of living are relentless, but the government refused a new cost of living package. Was that a political calculation or ideological stubbornness? I mean, are you hearing quite a lot from your constituents about the cost of living? Or is it criticism? What do you have to say to them on it?
Yeah, well, look, I'll be very honest with you on this. I've spoken about this in the Dáil and in parliamentary party meetings. In the last government, and I was a backbencher in that government, there were many one-off measures. I think we pride ourselves in being agile, was a term used, whether it was the COVID pandemic and being able to bring in payments quickly and intervene with sectors and people who were struggling. We've done so similarly in the last 2 or 3 years there, particularly during the winter period, cost of living and all of that. The one thing that became very obvious, though, was when you bring in something as a one-off measure, as a temporary measure, very quickly people calculate their household incomes and their household projections and budgets based around those figures. So when you rescind those supports, you basically undermine that household budget. So I think going forward, we're probably, now that we're out of the COVID years, thank God, we're in a period of, there is some flux in the global economy, but I do think there's a need to have, going forward, more traditional budgets as opposed to one-off cost of living measures. The student fees were an example. Now, that was ultimately, Mr. James Lawless did step in, and that was largely reconciled on budget day. But when you bring uncertainty into those, and when one-off payments don't become permanent payments, I think that can become unsettling for families. So I would like to see the next budget, which is still, it's still 9.5 months away, but I would hope it would be in a more traditional format in that period when we bring in interventions. But a lot has been done for old age pensioners, core social welfare rates, and a key government promise is to outrightly remove the means test for carers. That will be abolished entirely over the lifetime of this government. It's been scaled back each year, and that's a really positive thing. I've met the carers in Clare many times, and it's not good enough that they've been means tested over many years.
Donna, a quick response to that before we cast our gaze towards the coming 12 months.
So if you look at the student fees, and as spokesperson for further and higher education, I've spoke to all the student union, and they're all calling that an increase, because for 2 years students were used to the €2,000. Now it's gone up to 2,500. So no matter what way you dress that up, it is a hike in student fees. Now, Minister Lawless has come out in the last few days and has said that in this year's budget there will be more reductions. We have to see the wording on that, but that will be welcome. But if you look at the means test for carers, they're still struggling. There was over 200 months childcare.
Will you acknowledge the disregard, though? There's been a significant disregard, Donna, and that was a promise that the government and indeed our party made. It's been honoured. It's been honoured, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Well,
if it comes out over, that has been a good thing, but is it enough? They're not. If you speak to carers themselves, they'll tell you it's not enough. Just before Christmas, there was a rally outside the Leinster House with people with disabilities were there, and they feel completely abandoned. And one of them actually said that he got a hike in his fuel allowance, and he said it was great, lovely hike. He says, all it's doing is giving me enough to buy a packet of fire lighters for a fire that I can't afford to keep going. So that's really what people are saying. That's what they're saying on the ground.
Okay, and I'm sure
Ireland, there's no one abandoned in this country, in fairness, by the government. The government are doing their best to look after everyone in the country, and we all know that. We're here representing the people of our county and our country, and we're well aware that no matter what side we're.
Okay, and Joe, well, time is very much against us, so we do want to finish by looking to the rest of 2026. Would you describe it as a defining year for the government after, I think you could even admit, a sluggish start? Housing, of course, remaining a big test. Perhaps the biggest test, undoubtedly, as Cathal touched on. We're forecast to be one of Europe's strongest economies again in 2026. Infrastructure promised at record levels. Is this going to be a defining year, and why should people believe this will be the year the government and Fine Gael as part of it will deliver?
Yes, my belief is there will be a lot achieved in 2026. As I said earlier on, it's not going to happen overnight. We're well aware of the Hickory report and where we are with that. We're not going to go through it here this morning. Hopefully there'll be progress in improving our health services and our ambulance services in the Midwest region and in our county in 2026. We're well aware of the housing crisis, and hopefully there'll be infrastructure put in place that there'll be more houses developed in 2026. The other thing is our roads network. It needs improvement. It needs more investment. That's something we're looking at. And also traffic calming through villages and towns. That's something we're looking at as well. And hopefully there'll be more investment in that. My belief is 2026 will be a good year. We have to think of our farming community, small businesses, families who's out there. Like we said, the cost of living is not easy anymore. People are struggling. But we as a government will work to support those people, do our utmost for them, and see if they can have a better future going forward, which my belief is.
Okay,
yes,
and I do want to afford Cathal and Donna time to talk about this as well. So Cathal, by this time next year, what must Fianna Fáil point to in order to say that 2026 wasn't another year of drift?
Well, look, we've kind of covered the economic stuff quite largely already. One thing I think that'll be in sharp focus in the second half of this coming year is Ireland hosting the EU presidency. So it's a big time on the world stage, as I've been saying already in the interview. And I think, but it's also a chance for us to showcase the very best in Ireland. So I'm talking about Irish agriculture, the Irish economy. I'm talking about, in particular, our airports. And one of the focuses I hope to have in 2026 is as chairman of the Shannon Airport Oireachtas Group, myself, Joe and Donna and Timmy and all the other TDs in Midwest, I hope to convene a meeting of us. We need to aim in 2026 to have a real solid input for Shannon Airport in the new aviation policy. We also need to ensure in 2026 that the Regional Airports Programme, which is a funding mechanism for smaller airports. Now bear with me, I'm not saying Shannon's smaller, but it's for airports that have passengers under a certain threshold. I think we need to adjust that. We need to ensure that Shannon has an annual revenue stream. We need to ensure that the Hickory report's advanced. We need to ensure that the EU presidency is a success. And just finally on that, there's a note of caution. I think everyone has been reading about this in national papers. It's often the risks and the challenges we don't foresee that can be the greatest ones. Ireland now has to grapple with security risks, the likes of which we've never seen or predicted could happen before. So 2026, I think, particularly hosting the European presidency is a year we want to ensure, particularly in the west of Ireland and County Clare, that those offshore cables we have coming in from our shoreline are protected and that we've a successful 2026 in the European front.
Donna, from your perspective, I mean, the presidential election showed signs of cooperation on the left. Is Sinn Fein actively working towards a united alternative to Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael? If the government were to hypothetically collapse tomorrow, would you be genuinely ready to govern, or would you, as some critics would say, feel more comfortable attacking from opposition?
No, I think the combined opposition was a defining moment, and that really showed in the election of Catherine Connolly as president. It was the biggest vote for a presidential candidate we have ever seen. So I was proud to be part of that. But, as we are all individual parties with our own priorities, but we've a lot in common, and that's clear from the work that we have done. And even up just the week before, we had a combined opposition on student rent, and we came together. And so it is looking good that we can show that there is an alternative. People had lost hope, and it's our job to work hard to listen and fight and show people that we can make it happen. So we are ready, and we are doing good. But I think if you were to look forward, I think we need to start looking at the assessment of needs for children. I mean, one of the lows during the year was the death of Harvey, and these kind of things need to be really pushed. Children living with scoliosis and spina bifida have to be looked at. Child homelessness has to be looked at. And then when you look at the Hickory report, we need to be, and it's something that we are doing as opposition as TDs in Clare, we are working together on that, on the Crick report. We have signed a letter saying that we want the hospital, we want it to be in and around Clare as I have suggested. And I think we will work together going forward on issues that need to be going.
Okay, we'll see how the rest of 2026 unfolds, but my thanks to three of our TDs there, Donna McGettigan, Cathal, Crowe, and to Joe Cooney joining me in studio.